was their culture. It's unbelievable. So, there's the old, people were banging on Lane Kiffin this week and LSU, but it's always been the truth. Strike when the iron is hot and never settle. Ole Miss, Lane Kiffin's like, I'm settling. LSU is not settling. So this goes back. Why is Detroit going backwards? Did the players get worse? No, they settled. They had the best offensive coordinator in football. He left. He's now got Chicago as a elite team, and they settled on an in-house candidate who may be more than capable, but he's not Ben Johnson. And I've said the greater the coordinator or coach you lose, the broader the search has to be to replace him. We all know that. Steve Jobs, force him out of Apple. You better get the next Steve Jobs, or you're going to be begging 10 years later for Steve Jobs, the late Steve Jobs, to come back, which Apple was doing. Like I say, if you're gonna fire James Franklin at Penn State, I said, okay, won a lot of games. Now they can't find a coach. Be very careful. The answer for fans is fire everybody. And the answer for fans in the media is hire the friendly guy everybody likes. Michigan football did that. Doesn't quite look the same, does it? 2 years later. And Detroit had great coordinators, Aaron Glenn, Ben Johnson, and they stayed in-house. And so, 90% of Americans, I think, and it's not a bad thing, but are very content being good. But if you want to be great, if you want to hoist trophies, there's two things you have to do. You can't settle, and you have to be aggressive. Because if you're not aggressive, you're like 90% of Americans who aren't aggressive. And you'll be somewhere in the pack, slightly below, middle of it, or slightly above.
Okay. I think we're missing this a little bit. Listen. These teams will often hire in-house because that coach who's coming up now is learning what this current team is about, the current rhythm of the play calling, the approaches, the game planning, the ins and outs of the offense or defense. We'll just stick with offense right now. And they're learning all of that. It's what you do within companies. And when you lose, say, a Ben Johnson, you can't just magically find that next Ben Johnson. It's not easy. So I agree. Like right now we have the Lions and the Eagles. Both seemingly made mistakes with hiring their coordinators. Now, I can criticize them, but also not blame them at the same time. I could understand the move, but I can still criticize the move as well. To me, there's a fundamental difference. Because I was saying, I think the Eagles needed to go get like a Clint Kubiak or something, like an experienced play caller, specifically because they had just won a Super Bowl. And it's just like the stakes could not be higher. I think there's the argument that there's more wiggle room for the Lions because Ben Johnson had been in-house for years now, whereas like Kellen Moore and the Eagles were not, and they had this problem already in the past. So they kind of like should have learned their lesson a little bit and be like, we need an experienced play caller. Whereas the Lions are like, you have Ben Johnson, you have this other coaching staff that you could say like, hey, we knew Ben Johnson was going to be leaving. We were kind of planning for this already. We kind of understood the process, et cetera, et cetera. This guy's been working closely with Ben Johnson, all of this type of stuff. Like, to me, that is more explainable. Now, what I argued a lot with a lot of Lions fans earlier when this was all going down like in the summer and whatnot, they were like, no, this is all Dan Campbell's offense. It's not Ben Johnson. It's not Ben Johnson. And I was just like, that's just not true. Ben Johnson has Ben Johnson learned from Dan Campbell? Sure. But Ben Johnson is the play caller. He is the elite offensive mind. That's the story. That's the reality. If it wasn't, then Dan Campbell would have been calling plays from the jump. And so, there was like that big back and forth conversation about that right now. And so, this is unfortunately where the Lions are at. And the biggest thing with coaching is when things are going well, it's kind of easy just to kind of keep that going. It's kind of, like anything in health, in financial aspects, educational aspects. It's like so much easier to maintain what you have rather than rebuild. If your health declines, it's so much harder to get it back up rather than just having health and maintaining it. Maintenance is always easier. And so when you don't have the right coach, when you are dealing with some issues and now you need to troubleshoot, you just can't quite solve the problem. And but it's ironically two teams that have been so, equal on so many different levels, the Eagles and the Lions, are both experiencing that now. They have these issues that they need to troubleshoot, but because the coaching is not good enough right now, they just can't quite solve their problems. And it's disappointing. It's disappointing to observe and watch, especially because this has been, the Lions have been such a great team, such a dynamic, such an exciting team to watch. And now there's the potential that they might not even make the playoffs. And that's just like, that's crazy right now. That should not be. That should not even be on the table. Just like when you have a healthy Lamar, a healthy Josh, a healthy Mahomes, a healthy Joe Burrow, like it's like it should be incomprehensible that any of those teams could not make the playoffs. It's just like, I can understand if you're decimated with injuries and you're just like, there's just too much to overcome. But that was not the case with the Lions. Not to say that they didn't have to deal with injuries, but you're just like, you should still be able to find your way into the playoffs. Like, come on now. And so, yeah, like I think it makes sense. I think Detroit Lions fans can be optimistic and hopeful. But I think also being frustrated and angry and just, really annoyed about how this is all unfolding, I think is also totally fair. And the reality is it's just like, there's no real easy answer for this problem that some of these teams face, whether you have a defensive coach or whether you have more of like a CEO style type coach like Dan Campbell, where you're reliant on the offensive coordinator. And the most important role for really any team is the offensive play caller and the quarterback. That relationship is the most important relationship. When you don't have that right, you're in a lot of trouble. You're just in a lot of trouble. And even when things are going well, if you don't have someone who can troubleshoot, you don't have someone who can resolve that right now. And it's a limitation. It becomes a problem. So the Detroit Lions, so much is at stake right now, going up against this Dallas Cowboys team. Once upon a time, you'd easily be like, oh, the Lions got this. This is easy. Not easy, but like, you'd be able to be a lot more confident, chest out. Lions are going to be able to take care of business at home. It's got to have it win. Dan Campbell's going to get this team ready, right? Like Glenn defense, Ben Johnson offense, boom, 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 boom. Check, 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 check. Win. Back in this thing. Let's go. I don't know if you could bring that level of confidence right now. And I feel the same way about the Philadelphia Eagles. It's like, where does the confidence come from? Where does the problem solving come from? And it's just not there. And there's a difference between coming up ever so short. Like, some people are trying to blame like Andy or Mahomes with what's going on with Kansas City. And it's just like, they're coming up like ever so short. They're like right there and they just can't quite get it. It's just like, that's just football. That's just sports. But when you don't even really have a chance, when it doesn't feel like you even have control of that game, or you watch that game and you're just like, it didn't feel like, watching Philadelphia versus Chicago. You don't watch that game and think like, oh, Philly had a chance to win that. Like, you just felt like they never had a chance, that they were never in control of that game for even a second. It's like, well, that's coaching. Right? That's coaching. Coming up ever so short where there's no glaringly, you still score like 30 plus points or 4 touchdowns, whatever it is. And like, you just come up short and there was no glaring obvious issues where like you didn't call a timeout or you should have kicked a field goal, which would have tied the game, but instead you went for it and then you got stopped. Unless there is those specific, things that happened in that game, if you just come up short, you're just like, just football, man, just what happens. And that's not the case right now. That hasn't been the case for the Lions, hasn't been the case for the Eagles, and it's not a surprise that they both lost their coordinator, right? Like they're both going through a similar issue, and yet they're having a near identical impact on, an identical impact, an identical outcome to how these games are unfolding, to the questions that you have about their team, whether it be offense or defense for that matter. Obviously with the Eagles, there's continuity with their defensive coordinator, whereas the Lions do not. So, and both O-lines aren't as great as it was. But the difference also here is that no one's questioning Jared Goff. No one's questioning Dan Campbell to rally the troops. No one's questioning their ability to run the ball with Gibbs and whatnot. And so these problems should be more easily solved for this Detroit Lions team. There's seemingly less of a mess to clean up there. So it's just like, as long as your coach is just somewhat competent, and I'm talking about coordinating now, Maureen, you should be able to find your way through it. You should be able to find your way through it and not now just circle the drain and just rip off loss after loss after loss after loss. Makes more sense for me that the Eagles could find themselves in that situation, but not the Lions, considering the circumstances. But it is a little bit jarring when you see what the Bears were able to do to the Eagles, and then you look at what the Lions were able to do to the Eagles, and it was just night and day. And you're not going to tell me that Gibbs isn't a monster. And it's just like, why didn't they have that approach? So yeah, we'll have to just kind of wait and see. I mean, a lot of this is really obviously going to come down to Thursday. It really very much feels like you lose this game, almost feels like playoffs are somewhat out of reach at that point, considering everyone's record here. You win this game, you're right there. You're right there. You're right there. So it's all going to come down to Thursday. But those are just my thoughts. I'd absolutely love to hear yours. What do you guys all think about the Detroit Lions? Will they be able to find themselves into the playoffs? Where do you think the problems lie? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single comment, so whether you agree with me or disagree with me, either way, let's get in some discussions, let's get in some fights, but ultimately, let's just have some fun. And please do consider subscribing. We're building an amazing community here, and I absolutely love to see you part of it. I want to build something that we all generally feel connected to. Something that we're really excited to be part of. I think we're well on our way to doing it. Please don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, as it really does help with the visibility and the algorithm. Thank you so much. See you next time.